Have you ever had a thought you don't dare say out loud? A thought that goes against what everyone around you believes. Hold on to it, because it might be the last thing you truly own. Now, imagine a world where you can't even think that thought safely. A world where screens in your own home are watching you, listening to your breath, and scanning your face to know what you're really feeling. A world where you're not punished for your actions, but for your intentions. Your crime isn't what you do, it's what you think. What if you were told that 2 + 2 = 5 and you had to believe it not just with your mouth but in your very soul, and that your truest freedom was to love your slavery? This isn't some distant nightmare. These are the rules in the world of what is arguably the most dangerous novel in history. Today, we dive into the story of 1984, a story that is no longer just a novel, but a warning manual for what could happen, or perhaps for what is already happening.
Before we journey into this world, if you believe these are conversations worth having, support our mission by liking this video and subscribing. It ensures we can continue exploring these crucial stories together. And so we travel back to a world that is both history and a warning. Let us begin. On a cold day in April of the year 1984, in the city of London, one of the great cities of Oceania, a story unfolds. Oceania stood as one of the world's 3 vast empires, encompassing nations of the Western world such as Britain, America, South Africa, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. In this era, London was a city gripped by extreme poverty, its people enduring immense economic hardship. The buildings of London were small and dwarfed by 4 colossal structures that dominated the skyline. These were the 4 ministries of Oceania. The first, the Ministry of Truth, was responsible for news, education, and the fine arts. The second, the Ministry of Peace, concerned itself with war. The third, the Ministry of Love, maintained law and order. And the fourth and final ministry, the Ministry of Plenty, managed economic affairs. Viewed from above, these 4 ministries were the largest things in the city, each a towering pyramid. Yet the grandest and most imposing of them all was the Ministry of Truth. Its sheer size, a monolith of white reinforced concrete, made all surrounding buildings appear minuscule. Within the Ministry of Truth lay a department known as the Records Department. This section was tasked with managing the historical events of Oceania, and it was here that a very humble employee named Winston Smith worked. One day, Winston found himself gazing at the Ministry of Truth, contemplating its immense structure and the strange slogans etched upon it. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Despite working in one of the nation's most important departments, Winston was far from happy. This feeling intensified whenever he looked at the ever-present image that surrounded him, the portrait of Big Brother. Big Brother represented a mixture of love, fear, and respect. He was the embodiment of the state's leadership, yet no one knew his real name, nor much about him, except that he was always watching. Everywhere you went, you would find the telescreen, a 2-way monitor that recorded everything. This screen, bearing the image of Big Brother, watched you in every location, aware of your every move. It could not only see you, but could also sense if you were distressed or held any negative feelings towards Big Brother or the ruling party. Beneath Big Brother, society was divided into 3 classes. The first, representing about 2% of the population, comprised the inner party. The second class, the outer party, made up around 13% of the populace. The overwhelming majority, however, were the proletariat, or the common people, who constituted 85% of the country. This group, despite its size, was the most hardworking and suffered the most in Oceania. There was another class of people living in the equatorial regions, but they were not considered part of the state at all. During that time of year in Oceania, the Hate Week was held. For 2 minutes each day, known as the 2 Minutes Hate, people would gather in a large hall On the screen would appear the face of a man named Emmanuel Goldstein, considered the #1 enemy of the people. Goldstein was a figure whose status was second only to Big Brother himself, but he was the nation's ultimate traitor. He had led a revolution against the ruling party, managed to escape, and was now trying to spread his ideas through a party called the Brotherhood. This party promoted revolutionary ideas against the regime. During the 2 minutes hate, people would scream at the top of their lungs, overcome with a hysterical frenzy. Failure to do so would arouse suspicion. To release their pent-up emotions, they directed this negative energy towards Goldstein, whom everyone around them despised, hurling accusations, insults, and curses at him. This campaign of hatred was designed to make people feel animosity towards anyone other than Big Brother and the system itself. It was a psychological tool to control the populace, channeling their anger in a specific direction and providing an outlet for their frustrations against Goldstein. Although Winston participated in this hate campaign, he couldn't bring himself to love the ruling regime or Big Brother. He was dissatisfied with the state of the country, but had no way to express these thoughts. For this reason, Winston decided to go to an antique shop and buy a notebook to write down his ideas, everything he felt about the ruling party, Big Brother, and all that was happening around him. But the very act of thinking about expressing his thoughts could land him in serious trouble, especially since he worked for the party. Yet, Winston decided to take the risk of giving voice to his ideas. Winston arrived at the antique shop where he had bought the diary. He purchased it from an old man named Mr. Charrington, a man with white hair, around 60 years old, who was one of the very few people Winston interacted with in his daily life, and perhaps the only person he trusted enough to speak with. Back in his modest home, Winston wanted to start writing, but the telescreen was watching, monitoring his every move. He managed to find a small corner out of the screen's view and began to pour his thoughts onto the page. He wrote and wrote, finally letting out what was inside him, penning a terrifying sentence, a sentence that could lead to his ruin. Down with Big Brother. Down with Big Brother. The main reason Winston loathed Big Brother, the party, and the life he led in London was his knowledge. This knowledge came from his job in the records department, where his specific task at the Ministry of Truth was to constantly alter history with his own hands, as instructed by the party. For instance, missiles rained down daily on different parts of London because the country was at war, but no one knew why the war was happening, nor did anyone even know what year it was. The world at that time was divided into 3 different empires. The first was Oceania, where Winston lived. The other 2 great powers were Eurasia, composed of Russia, which had managed to control a large part of Europe, and East Asia, which included China, parts of the Japanese islands, and northern India. The remaining parts of India, the Middle East, and Africa were battlegrounds. The government of Oceania was totalitarian, meaning it controlled everything. It controlled the human mind, knew exactly what people were doing, and changed history as it pleased. At one point, Oceania was at war with East Asia, with Eurasia as its ally. But then things changed, and it found itself at war with Eurasia. Winston's job was to erase history completely. If the people had previously heard that they were at war with East Asia, now all historical records would state that the war had always been with Eurasia. The Ministry of Truth was the most important ministry because it reshaped people's minds. One of the party's most famous slogans was, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." This brings us to one of the ideas Winston hated most, used to control the present: doublethink. The party's primary function was to use conscious deception, the idea of lying with premeditation, and they believed that people should be trained to use doublethink in their lives. The core slogan on the Ministry of Truth was, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength." The party believed that the more a person understood, the more they were deceived, and the more intelligent they were, the less sane. The greatest practitioners of doublethink were its inventors, the ruling party. Doublethink created a state of confusion in society. The idea that society could combine knowledge and ignorance, cynicism and fanaticism was a fundamental characteristic of the community. This concept was most clearly embodied in the various ministries of Oceania. The Ministry of Peace was concerned with war, and the Ministry of Love was concerned with torture. The life Winston, or anyone else in Oceania, lived was devoid of any social connection between people. You had no friends or loved ones because Oceania forbade it. You were not allowed to have any feelings except for Big Brother, directed only towards the state. There was no such thing as love, no such thing as relationships between people. A son could easily report his father, and a brother could just as easily report his brother. In short, everyone watched everyone else, and in such a state, it was incredibly difficult to trust anyone. The only person Winston really interacted with was Mr. Charrington, from whom he bought the diary. But their relationship was not strong. He was not a friend or close to him. But all of this began to change over time. Two important figures entered Winston's life. The first was Julia, a girl who worked in the Ministry of Truth. Winston often saw her, and she always seemed to notice him and look his way. Although he was attracted to her, he suspected she might be a member of the Thought Police. The Thought Police were the ones who arrested people for a crime called thought crime. If you were suspected of merely thinking, of having independent thoughts and wanting to keep them, you would be arrested and tortured in the Ministry of Love. You would be tortured in every conceivable way, and no one could reach you or know anything about you, what you were tortured with, or what happened to you at all. The Ministry of Love was the terrifying place everyone feared. Winston avoided Julia until one day, while walking in the Ministry of Truth, he bumped into her. As he lay on the ground, she secretly slipped a small piece of paper into his hand, a note with a single sentence written on it. Of course, Winston couldn't read it in the Ministry of Truth. When he later returned home and opened the paper, he found it said that she loved him. At that moment, Winston was overcome with a mix of conflicting emotions, excitement and joy on one hand, fear and shock on the other. Was Julia trying to trap him? Was she part of the Thought Police? Or did she genuinely have feelings for him, just as he had for her? Their indirect communication continued until one day Julia asked him to meet her outside London in a place beyond the telescreen surveillance. Indeed, Winston managed to meet Julia outside the city, and they began to talk. He discovered he loved her even more because she too hated the ruling party and shared his hatred for Big Brother. It was only then that Winston felt he truly needed to do something, that he had a connection with someone he loved and they shared a common goal. As days passed, Winston's attachment to Julia grew significantly. He managed to ask Mr. Charrington, the man who sold him the diary, to rent him a room above the shop. This room became their secret meeting place, where he could be with Julia without being watched by surveillance cameras. This brings us to the second character, a pivotal and very important figure in the events that would unfold for Winston, O'Brien. O'Brien was a member of the inner party, a higher rank than the outer party to which Winston belonged in the Ministry of Truth. Although O'Brien held a higher position and was a more important figure, Winston had a feeling that this man was completely different from anyone else. He didn't seem to share the same enthusiasm for the ruling party. He felt he didn't love the party like the others. What made him even more suspicious was when O'Brien asked him to come to his house to give him the New Speak Dictionary. The language in Oceania was constantly being changed. The old language, English, had a variety of terms, but the party was always updating the language to render people incapable of expressing themselves, of articulating their thoughts using different words and concepts. A person living in Oceania had to speak in a very simple way, to the point that they couldn't understand complex terms, only the simple language taught by the state. Winston took Julia, and they went to O'Brien's house extremely excited for the meeting because he knew that no one ever invited anyone to their home. Indeed, as soon as Winston and Julia arrived at O'Brien's, he did something very strange. He revealed that he had the ability to turn off the telescreen that was monitoring him. The ability to turn off your telescreen was something only a very small group of people in the ruling party could do. O'Brien then began to talk to Winston and Julia and showed them the book he wanted them to see. But this book was not the new dictionary. It was Goldstein's book, the book that contained the principles of the revolution against the ruling party and Big Brother. In that moment, Winston and Julia confessed that they hated Big Brother and were overjoyed having obtained Goldstein's book. Indeed, Winston and Julia took the book and went to the room they rented from Mr. Charrington. They began to read, completely captivated by the ideas within. So engrossed were they that they
They stayed up all night reading, but then the unexpected happened. While Winston and Julia were reading Goldstein's revolutionary book, Winston's greatest fear became a reality. The thought police burst in and arrested them as they were reading. Winston noticed that one of the men looked strangely familiar. He had seen him before.
He was about 35 years old, but resembled someone he knew. It turned out to be Mr. Charrington, the 60-year-old man from whom he had bought the diary and rented the room. Mr. Charrington was a member of the secret police and had been watching Winston all along. He had placed a hidden telescreen in the room he rented to them, monitoring Winston and Julia, hearing and seeing everything. Winston and Julia were arrested, each taken away in a separate vehicle. Winston had no idea where the vehicle was taking him. After about 24 hours, he found himself in a place he had never seen before. It had a very high ceiling and no windows. The only thing Winston suspected was that he was now in the ministry of love. The first sensation he felt was a sharp pain in his stomach, as he had been sitting for a full day without any food. Suddenly, he heard a voice from the telescreen say, "Smith, W, 6079, hands out of pockets." Winston entered a long cycle of torture, both psychological and physical, in every imaginable form and in forms one could not even imagine existed. But he noticed that most of the people being tortured with him were terrified of something called Room 101. This room was the place used to reach the highest level of torture. Winston constantly heard the stories of those who had been to Room 101 and saw how some people were struck with sheer terror at the mere mention of being sent there. He heard the voices of prisoners who were ready to confess to anything, who were even willing to give up their own children and wives in exchange for not entering Room 101. Despite this, Winston resisted the torture and refused to confess to anything. This went on for days and months, until one day, while being tortured, he noticed a person whose face he knew well. The man he saw before him he had seen before. It was O'Brien. O'Brien was the one responsible for his torture in the prison, the one directing the others on how to torture Winston. O'Brien approached Winston and smiled, trying to make him confess. He began to talk to Winston, attempting to draw him into conversation while continuing to torture him in every possible way. "You know, Winston, we control everything. He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. Do you know what year it is? Do you even know where you are? You seem to be a slow learner, Winston. See my fingers. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston?" The torture session continued, but Winston refused to speak. He tried to ask O'Brien about Julia and about Big Brother, unwilling to change his mind because he believed deep down that no matter how much power the party had to control people, it could not change you from within. A person's will cannot be changed. You cannot force someone to believe something they are not convinced of. The party had the power to change facts and people, to make them believe an idea to the extent that they could convince people that 2 + 2 = 5. But Winston believed that freedom was having the will to believe from within that 2 + 2 = 4. After long sessions of torture, O'Brien took Winston to Room 101. He began to strap Winston to a chair, securing the upper part of his head, and started talking to him. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now do you begin to understand, Winston? The torture in Room 101 continued until Winston faced his greatest fear. How many fingers am I holding up? What is 2 + 2? O'Brien exploited Winston's weakness, his fear of rats. Winston had a terrifying phobia of rats and feared them more than anything else. O'Brien began to bring the rats closer to Winston, asking him the crucial question, what is 2 + 2? What is 2 + 2? As soon as Winston saw the rats, he began to scream hysterically, like a small child. Not the rats! Not the rats! Take Julia! Take Julia! Take Julia! No, not the rats! Not the rats! How many is 2 + 2? Answer me. 5. 5. O'Brien managed to change Winston from the inside, to break him psychologically and make him believe an idea he had never been convinced of. After the torture session and the nervous breakdown Winston suffered, he was released back into the world. Winston no longer even felt guilty for betraying Julia, for confessing about her. Julia too was released from prison, a changed person who had done the same
same thing as Winston. She had given up Winston and confessed under torture. Winston and Julia were now completely different people. They could no longer even look each other in the face. They returned to their old lives, serving the party, serving Big Brother. One day, Winston was sipping his favorite drink and watching the big screen, watching the news about how Oceania had won the war. He began to hear the loud cheers of the people hailing Big Brother. As Winston looked at the picture of Big Brother, he noticed something strange. Big Brother was now smiling at him, a very beautiful smile. Winston finally realized that he had been suffering from a misunderstanding. He discovered in the end that he truly loved Big Brother.
The ending of the novel 1984 may seem shocking, disheartening, and incredibly harsh, but have you ever wondered about the true meaning behind it? Why did everything end this way? This conclusion is not merely a sad ending. It is the very essence of the entire message, the warning that George Orwell wanted to scream out to the world. First, we must understand that the party's goal was not to kill Winston. Death is a relief. Their goal was not even to simply subdue him with fear. It was something deeper, more terrifying. Their goal was to convert him. They wanted to conquer the last bastion of freedom, the one place no army can reach, the human mind. The ending does not show the defeat of Winston's body, but the state's complete victory over his soul. They succeeded in getting inside his head, erasing his old self, and building a new personality that serves them with devotion. So, what makes us human in the first place? Our capacity to love, our belief in truth, the independence of our thoughts. The party shattered all of this in Winston, piece by piece. First, love. In Room 101, when Winston faced his worst fears, he didn't just scream for his own survival. He screamed, "Do it to Julia." In that moment, he didn't just betray Julia, he betrayed the only honest human connection in his life. They forced him to trade his love for his life, and in doing so, they killed his capacity to love forever. Second, truth. Winston's entire resistance was rooted in his simple belief that 2 + 2 = 4, his faith in a fixed truth that no power could change. But under torture, they didn't just make him say it equals 5. They made him believe it from the depths of his heart. Herein lies the terror, when truth becomes whatever the authorities decide it is, not what is actually real. And this brings us to the final sentence, the most terrifying sentence in the entire novel. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. Let's deconstruct this line. He had won the victory over himself. What victory is this? It is not his victory, but the party's victory over him. The him he triumphed over was his old rebellious self, the one that thought, loved, and questioned. He killed the last free part left inside him. Then he loved Big Brother. This love isn't fake. It's not hypocrisy for the sake of survival. It is a real, sincere love, the product of a complete and total brainwashing. He has finally found peace and comfort, but not in freedom, in absolute submission. His struggle is over because he no longer knows anything left to struggle for. The ending of 1984 is an alarm bell, a warning cry from George Orwell across time. It tells us that the most dangerous form of tyranny is not the one that controls your actions, but the one that aspires to control your thoughts and feelings, to the point where it makes you love your chains and worship your jailer. It is a message about the importance of holding on to truth no matter the cost, and the necessity of defending freedom of thought, for it is the last line of defense separating humanity from a nightmarish world where everyone loves Big Brother.